All right, all right. Happy Thursday, folks. We are back together for another week of acknowledging our elders. Hey, y'all, my name is Nathan. I'm with the Bronx River Alliance in New York City Parks. And I'm so excited to be joined by Journey Vimwala. Hey, Journey, how you doing?
Hey, welcome back. Well, for Nathan, is welcome back because you wasn't here last week, which went out nice. We missed you though. So welcome everyone. My name is Journey Vimwala, and nice to see you guys as always. I think you guys are going to enjoy our discussion for the day. So just make yourself at home.
Yes, and we are so excited to be welcomed by a friend and a colleague, Siddhartha Sanchez. Sid, welcome to Acknowledging Our Elders. We would love for you to introduce yourself and just, share how you're doing today.
Good afternoon or good morning. It's right at the cusp. I'm doing okay. My name is Siddhartha Sanchez. I am excited, actually, I should say, not just okay, to have this conversation because I feel like I've never really been asked about my relationship to plants. And it's something that when I thought about it, even just for 1 second, I realized it's so rich and so much a part of, like, plants are so much a part of who I am. And I just never think about it or talk about it. And it's part of kind of my public as well as private persona. So I'm excited to share and get to know a little bit about what you guys are doing here.
Thank you. Yeah, we're excited. Today's going to be a little different. Each week, we usually focus in on a plant that has been calling to a person or has helped someone stay grounded in their life, their everyday living. And today, we're going to have just a kind of a broader conversation about Sid and their relationship with plants. And I'm really excited, Sid, to kind of experience that with you. So I welcome you to kind of start this conversation off. Like, I guess my first question is, how do you connect with plants, or what is your relationship with plants?
Okay, I can take that on. I feel like, that question is related to the preparing for this conversation, thinking about which plant is special to me. And I realized that because of my identity, it feels like there's so many plants that are special to me. And I would identify, among other things, as vegetarian, a gardener / farmer, also a lover of herbs and natural remedies, and someone who's been deeply impacted by plants in different ways. I think they're a part of my mental health. They're a part of my physical health. They surround me wherever I am. I make sure that they're around me, and they kind of define me as a nurturer as well, and someone who believes in the future and kind of the time warp that is stewarding plants, just the magic of seeds. And the other thought that came to mind when I was thinking about this, what plant is special to me, is the people who have influenced me and kind of made this identity that I claim so openly, right? My grandmothers, both of them, were deep plant lovers, elders in the true sense of the word, who always surrounded themselves with plants, always rescued plants, always nurtured plants. It was part of their daily ritual that I saw in both of their lives. And one of them in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment in Washington Heights with thankfully, 5th story light or 5th floor light, which I live on the 4th floor, so I appreciate the top floors of apartment buildings, or the higher floors. And my other grandmother in the Dominican Republic, really tending to her potted plants in her backyard, and her fruit trees and her flowers. But yeah, I'll pause there. I think those are some of the influences and some of my identity with plants.
Wow. I mean, I almost felt like I was beginning to be transported to DR as you started to describe that scene. I was like thinking of my experiences in PR, just like and experiencing and seeing people's yards and things. Um, Journey, do you have a kind of a thought? You unmuted yourself.
Yes, because when you was talking about, am I still muted? Oh, okay. When you was talking about, your grandmothers, I just was thinking, like, for a lot of us, how family plays such a big role in sometimes our introduction to plant, or just like, because we watch them first, right? Like, because you're seeing, like, they was rescuing plants, they was taking care of plants, they had all these rituals, and I'm like, wow, they are our early shapers of that relationship. And because they have always been kind of part of our lives in that way, it it never felt like, oh, plants, what's that? You know what I mean? So I kind of, like Nathan said, kind of went back, even myself, remembering my grandma in this big old field, looking around and trying to look for plants.
Yeah, I think about, well, along the lines of grandparents. I just came from Concrete Plant Park seconds ago, or minutes ago, and I was out there with Ana Lilia, one of our community members, and she was foraging with one of her best friends, and an elder, even, even more of an elder to me, someone who it just kind of walks along and is planting seeds and is like so intuitive, like everything, her connection and relationship with the land is so intuitive. So yeah, just affirming what Journey just said, where I feel like they were our teachers, and just so much gratitude for those elders for instilling that in us and me, right? Even my own elders, and connecting that, because that allowed me to be the person that I am today, to do the things that I am doing. And hopefully I'm also, right, catalyzing that and creating that lineage to keep that cycle and that relationship going. Sid, for you, as you like kind of think about that, like those elders that raised you and set planted these seeds, and these pieces of knowledge in your head. I'm curious, like, what did that look like for you? Are there any memories that stand out in particular?
I love this direction because it feels like it is early, and as a parent, it makes me wonder, what it means for my children, that I am who I am, right? And how I create those early memories for them. But for me, I started with my grandmothers, and I think I have to go to my mother next. But my grandmothers, the other thing I'll say about them is that um, I think as children we're very intuitive and emotionally intelligent, and I saw how the chaos, or the challenges, I will say, chaos, challenges, hardships, the stress of their lives was mitigated by the plants, right? Like their rituals, their relationship, their nurturing, their cuttings centered them, calmed them. The tea that my grandmothers would make, like my DR grandmother would make from the orange tree every morning, and how she would have it several times a day. It was all really essential to kind of who they were as loving entities, and kind of healthy influences in my life, right? And I would see them get thrown off, because life would throw curveballs even to grandmothers, right? And so I would see them get thrown off, but I would see them center and use use the plants in their lives to kind of come back to who they were, and to speak to me in a way, kind of hold me in a certain way, and that's significant. I never really thought about it in that way, but it definitely is a part of my history with my grandmothers. In terms of my mother, I think she took plants and had a completely different relationship from anyone else in my family and her family, in choosing to become a vegetarian as a teenager, right? In the Dominican Republic in the 70s. She opened I guess she started first with meditation and kind of an interest in Eastern philosophy that she shared with my father. They were yoga teachers, and eventually they opened up a yoga center, and my mother ran the kitchen, a vegetarian restaurant that's still open today in the capital of the Dominican Republic. And this was like in 1972, right? And she did that, and she used food and the preparation of vegetables and plants for health, for spiritual reasons, for love. and also for fundraising, right? She used it to sustain these yoga centers, first in the Dominican Republic, and then when she came here in the mid 70s, I think the first 5 years she was busy raising me, and we were growing plants on the windowsills. But after about 5-6 years, her and my dad also opened another yoga center, or opened a yoga center here in Washington Heights. And then that later moved to the Bronx on Sedgwick. And all of these centers, were about meditation and yoga and, kind of philosophy. And they all centered around food and vegetarian food, right? People came together, people paid for their meal. And that was how the rent was paid. And that's how we did the trips that I went on as a kid and the retreats that we did on. And it became, kind of my community as a child, but also, my mother's, labor of love and community service. I think eventually as she evolved, we realized that she was really kind of a pioneer. And in the 90s, I remember trying to start a business with her. She had a business. And what am I kidding? I was trying to formalize her business and, brought a logo and a website and some press to the mix as part of a class I did in college. And she was marketing wheat gluten in the 80s and 90s and selling pasteles, filled with vegetarian with soy and, and vegetables, and doing, kind of traditional ethnic foods and catering at YMPJ and other spaces, movement spaces. Up until probably 2010, something like that, when arthritis kind of made her slow down. But those connections to plants and food and community are all kind of mired and mixed into who I am and the work that I do with food justice and policy and some of the work that we do together. But yeah, I'll pause there.
Wow, you kind of answered, because I had a thought in my head. I was going to ask you, how, because you mentioned you're vegetarian, chef, right, farmer, gardener. So I was going to ask you how your relationship with plants plays out within all of those, because in all of those is like plant centered, and you just gave me the starter of one with the food, being a vegetarian, where I studied from your mom and how the plant played out in her life, right? And how it benefited the family, the community, the expansion. So how is that for you? How are your relationship with the plants playing out in all of those different aspects of various things that you do?
That's an interesting one. I think it's to list those identities. I don't have a business card that says those things. That says those things, right? Like that's who I am if you kind of really know me. And yet, if you see my work and the things that I care about, and it makes sense. I did want to give a shout out to my dad in case he ever sees this. He was the intellectual kind of theory behind all of it, and Diet for a New America and Gary Knoll and all the academic influences that kind of also steeped who I was and my identity. But in terms of those buckets and how plants connect to them, I mean, I think primarily, I'm a gardener for mental health because New York City is so hard in terms of growing food, right? And so I have dozens, maybe hundreds, I don't know, of plants in my apartment who are critical to my mental health on a day-to-day basis, right? And I have plants of all kinds, different kinds of light, different parts of the world. I try to learn about them. I keep them for years. Sometimes, the apartment plagues get me, and the mites and the gnats and all of those things. But, that's my primary relationship to plants. I think I'm moving into being more of a farmer and a gardener recently as part of the work and the love that I'm pouring into some land upstate that I'm involved in and that came to us in the last year. And so, I've had a a couple of rows of annuals going, and perennials are going in this year. I planted fruit trees last weekend for the first time in my life. I put in 8 fruit trees, my mini orchard. I was ambitious. I ordered 17. I had to give away some, but excited to be growing apples and Asian pears and apricots and cherries. I have raspberries and strawberries and asparagus and blackberries and blueberries waiting for me to plant this weekend. And that's where I am. And I prepare 2 meals a day, at least every day of my life, right? For my 3 beautiful children, my 18-year-old, my 16-year-old, and my soon to be 8-year-old. I am a diligent basic chef, basics. I'm really consistent. That's my pride and joy. I can't say that I'm a very fancy or even, plating, all those things. That's not the kind of chef that I am, but I do make sure that it tastes good and that it's got balance of nutrients and that it looks good, ideally. But yeah, I'll pause there.
That is awesome. I really, really like that, because it's like those things, like you mentioned, is not in a business card, and they don't have to be, because like you said, that is who you are, right? It's part of your identity. And I remember earlier you talked about you wanted to see now how your things with plants, possibly how your children are seeing it right through their lens, but what it looks like. Because with my kids it's the same. My oldest, who's 20, she knows plants, but she's not really into it, but from afar she's seeing, and that brings me comfort either way, because I know that when she gets older, she's going to look back and she's going to try to remember the things that say the things that I did, so she can go ahead and repeat. So I want to ask you, for all of the things that you know about plants that you've learned from your mom, from your grandmother, right? What would be one thing that you will love for your children to take from, plants as a whole? What is one thing you're like, if anything else, as long as you got this, you take this out of everything from all this generation, I will be good with it.
That's an interesting one. If I could pick one thing, right? Because that would be, it's true. Just one of the many benefits would be tremendous for them to keep or hold or carry with them. Even before I go there, I have to shout out my 16-year-old who has been really into decorating and just aesthetics and beauty, and as part of that has put plants kind of at the forefront and wants plants in her room and has asked me for different kinds of plants, and that's been really touching. And her handle is Ivy Fern, so that was also thought really interesting. And maybe I wasn't supposed to share that, but the other person I think that influences plants for me is my partner, right? I think we've surrounded ourselves with plants because my space is her space, and I'm the primary caretaker, but she had plants before me and values the benefits. Maybe the one thing I would hold out is, I guess because we're in New York City and because the world is so challenging sometimes, and we're surrounded by so many hard things, the mental health benefit of plants, right? I feel like if you can do what my grandmothers did and just come back to, how plants anchor, existence to some extent, right? Life in so many ways, and just marvel at even the tiniest cutting, or, the tree on the block, or, the plant in the windowsill on the fire escape, the cactus that you never water, all of it. I think the time frame that plants work in also help, I think, in understanding and kind of getting over mental health challenges and moments of difficulty. I think, plants kind of move slower than we do, and it's a good contradiction an important contradiction, I think, in a city like New York, and for young people who move very fast, right? If they can appreciate a plant and connect to a plant, and value kind of the peace that a plant or that plants bring to our lives, then I would be super happy with that.
I love that. I really love that, because mental health is extremely important. And it is one of those things that, it comes and goes, but we all experience it. And having something to have to be able to kind of be centered, right? Ground you. It's really, really important. So I think that was really a great one that you picked. What do you think, Nathan?
No, I'm just like in my head applauding, and it low key was nearly about to cry a minute ago. But I just like the truths that you just named, which I see play out within the work that I do along the Bronx River and the group that I just worked with at the park, where we acknowledged earlier, this week has been really hard. Like emotionally, we lost a lot of folks this week, and recognizing that and remembering that there are ways to find our way back. Like Beyonce's got a great song, Find Your Way Back Home, and that song really hit me in 2020 during COVID. And I think about find your way back home somehow. However you can find your way back home in this chaotic world, you got to find it, because it'll get you. And so I'm always thinking about how much plants just generously give. And that's really what I've heard from this whole conversation, is just like remembering that although they are so undervalued in our world, they are so much of why we are staying sane. And whether it's the parks you visit or the plants in your home because you're quarantining, whatever the reason is, they are what has been given to us on this planet to ground ourselves. It's no surprise they grow out of the earth, right? Like they're there to try to tether us back to it. And yeah, just really and thankful for this reminder in today's session. And yeah, I want to just acknowledge we're kind of coming to our close, and think about like if there's any other like final pieces we want to share with folks to take with them as the week comes to a close, and as we move into a Memorial Day weekend, right? Like a long weekend.
I'll jump in the spirit of shout outs. It just feels like I'm mapping all the people close to my life to some extent, and not just my relationship to plant, but the people in my life that influence me so much. I got to give it up to my little one for her awe, right? Like she brings the inspiration that, like, I don't know, the awe is the best way. Her awe makes me remember how awesome plants and nature and the earth are. Her excitement about plants and making connections and understanding them, the way she brings the farming that we're doing upstate to her classroom, and the gardening that she's doing in her balcony in school, and she maps our garden, she labels, she plants dozens of seeds diligently, she weeds, and she's 7, she's gonna be 8, but and I'm not even sure if this is her thing, but it's a part of who she is, right? And she appreciates it. It may or may not be who she is growing as a grown-up, but it's a part of who she is. And I have to give it up to kind of her and children overall for bringing that awe and that connection to nature, reminding us, how precious it is. To me, there's nothing more exciting than a bunch of kids in nature, right? And I have to find my way to more of that with my work and all of that. But yeah, I'll pause there. I know, Journey, you're a parent, and you reference your children as well. So I wonder if there's any connections you would share with that.
What was the last thing you? Because I didn't hear it.
Just any connections that you would share with being a parent and the awe or the way children in particular kind of remind I don't know, connect you to plants and remind you of how incredible plants are. That's what I was saying. I don't know if you share any of that.
Well, I definitely agree with you what you mentioned about your soon to be AU all than just being like in awe, because for me, my kids is who kind of brought me back to nature. You know, my son, that was his thing, always being out in nature, and it's like, oh my God, what is this? And you know, and then naturally, I just kind of got in that mood with them too, like, okay. And then I found things that I found my own interest kind of being brought back because I was like that as a child. And as you know, as you get older, they say leave children's ways to the side kind of thing. So it was put on pause, but they brought that back, you know, and that emphasis because they were so excited about it. It gave me the okay and the freedom to also be that excited. And I feel like I'm not being weird, am I? So I will definitely say that. And, you know, then it's like we become an example because sometimes they stay, like you say, you don't know if that's her thing. And sometimes they move away from it. But I know that in their life, at some point, they will come back to it at some point, because that's how we did it. And that's how it works. So it brings me joy. It really does. It brings me joy because there's always that one thing we all can always center back to and connect with is that. So I love it. And to everybody watching, what I would tell you guys is like, go outside, go out, be in nature, take your children with you, and allow yourself to be childlike, allow that curiosity to come through you and to set in as you're seeing the plants and looking at it. Or even if you're not able to come outside and you feel like you can't do it right now, if you have any kind of plants, right? Look at that plant. Sometimes I look outside of my window and it's not always a beautiful view, but there are trees. And in my mind, I just liken into those trees. Yes. And all I see in my mind, I'm in another world. I don't see the building. I just see the trees and the skies, just like that. And that is just good enough to center you. So at the very minimum, do that. But if not, come outside, enjoy the fresh air. The plants are providing us with oxygen, right? So, and the colors and the scent, the flowers are out. It's smelling really, really great. So I do want to give a shout out to the black cherry tree and all the flowers that are blooming right now, especially the black locust, because if you're walking outside or in the park and you're smelling something sweet, it will lift you up immediately. So definitely, that's what I have to say. Get outside and smell nature.
This conversation has been just so nourishing. I'm gonna say that, and very grounding. And I just want to thank you both for again, you know, an incredible week. I'm over here looking at my phone, which has the chat up, and people are really really grounded through this conversation and really appreciative. I'm getting a lot of gratitude through the chat over here. So just so much gratitude for what y'all brought today. And with that, I think we might be closing up. AK, we are closing up. But Sid, we look forward to seeing you again soon. I'm excited that you're working again in the Bronx. You're not working remotely. We'll get to connect at the Foodway and Journey. It's always a pleasure to connect in person and virtually. But may everyone stay safe and have a great grounding week. We'll see you soon. We'll see you next Thursday. Take care, folks.